I'm Peter Begala from Family Business Magazine. I'm joined today by Charlie CARR from EY's Family Office Advisory Services. We're doing a two-part series on succession. Succession is often kind of a complicated process in which the family is looking at transferring power, control, wealth, moral authority, values, all types of things from one generation to the next. And Ernst & Young has done a fair amount of work with families of wealth and family businesses, and they found a couple of key things. And I want to talk with Charlie about some of those things that EY has found and kind of dive into it so that we kind of untangle what can be an often complicated process.
Yeah, so it starts with 4 key dimensions that we found of succession planning. It starts with leadership. So who is responsible for leadership? Let's find out who are you going to assign. So if you're going to be intentional about doing succession planning, let's make sure that somebody is in fact assigned and they perceive that as their job. So most of the time that's going to be the board of directors. It could be the family council, or it could be the CEO of the business. Usually those 3 account for about 90% of instances of who's responsible.
But there's somebody or some entity named as, hey, we're thinking about succession, we need to move this process along.
Exactly, and hopefully they're not waiting until succession's imminent. It has to happen. Hopefully they've planned this long in advance and doing this when there's still time to do something.
Okay, the second dimension?
Second dimension is ownership. Interesting dimension of that is voting stock. How are we going to pass voting stock? You see quite often that the voting stock is kept for the oldest generation. They retain it until their death, so they still have the chance to veto decisions, things like that. But then how are you going to pass it? Who gets it?
Yeah, I could imagine that the 40 or 50-year-old person who's driving a lot of value is participating in the wealth or distributions, but doesn't have control or voting stock, could become disenfranchised.
They could be. It can be a key source of dissent among the family members. You have to be careful that that doesn't. Where the argument comes in is when, how's it going to get passed to the next generation? Okay. If it really is going to go to one person, that can be a cause of discussion.
So control is a lightning rod.
That's right. That's
and
right.
some of those are pretty critical conversations to have.
That's right.
Okay, good. And then the third dimension.
The third dimension is legacy and values. So how do we pass what made the business successful? How do we retain that? So if the business was successful because of maybe it's customer service, or maybe it's how they treated their employees, how they fit into the community that they're in, whatever elements, whatever key values have made that business successful, make sure those get passed down to the next generations.
Yeah, and I would imagine that they've been distilled in such a way that the next generation can make them their own.
That's what you'd hope to do. So that's this whole succession planning should be looking at distilling it in that way to help them own it.
Yeah, so that the next generation can take those values and put it maybe into a new market, a new platform. Yeah, okay.
That's right.
I get it. And then the fourth.
So the fourth dimension is wealth transition. So how, as the family grows and they go across generations, you're going to have family members that maybe they're owners, but they're not working in the business. They're not on the board of the business. They may have a different perspective than somebody who is working in the business. So their concern is, what is your distribution policy? How's money getting passed to me? Somebody working in the business is more concerned about, let's make sure we can grow the business. Let's retain the income into the business so we can continue to grow the business for the future. So distribution versus reinvestment is always a key thing. Compensation policy. We'll get asked often about that. So those family members working in the business, many times those who aren't working in the business think they're overpaid. They're being paid more than they should be. And so that's just a kind of a healthy tension that happens. The key is making sure you're transparent, you're discussing it with them, that you have a real policy, that you don't just let it evolve, that you're discussing it.
Do you see the family kind of deciding what's the purpose of the wealth on a family basis?
That's right. And so that is the start of all of these things here, is just figuring out what is the purpose. Is it important to retain the business in the family? Sometimes your succession plan is that we're just going to sell the business at some point. So that obviously has a huge impact on these things. But if you decide that I want to retain the business in the family, that's where you have to be very intentional about defining the leadership, about how we're going to transition the wealth, how we're going to transition the legacy and the values, those things.
So those 4 dimensions, I think that they're a series of conversations or areas of inquiry that the family has to hold some discussions around.
That's right, and they need to be very intentional, and it's going to take time. This is not a 2 months, 6 months process. This is years.
Right. Well, we've covered kind of some of the key conversations in this first part of a series on succession. In our next one, we'll get into actual specific practices. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.